To start off this panel discussion, the way I want to go through it is actually get our speakers here to engage among themselves, perhaps a question or two from the audience. But I think it was David who put through how reasoning to try and cultivate a reason, or the way of thinking in terms of reason, is to get it to be done at university level is far too late. We should be getting it done younger. And I suppose we go back, what should we be doing at a school level? Sarah's not here anymore. We look at science education, perhaps, where it should be starting, where we should be getting this kind of thinking, which should be cultivated from a very young age. What should we be doing in our schools to try and encourage this way of thinking?
It's my impression much, much later in the day, right? I in my teaching career, deal with a relatively skewed sample of people after they've been through the school system. And the things that make a difference aren't always the ones that get emphasized in policy, right? The subjects where people are likely to have learned something about thinking will be history and English teachers that people talk about when they look back and think, where did I actually learn to use my brain? In a way that's relevant for everyday debates. I'm not in any way trying to diss the sciences there, but if we're looking for where it is that people learn to think, then I think it's a certain style of English and history teaching. And I think what we should do is find out what the countries that are doing well are doing and work out how much of that we can afford to do. I don't want to pretend to be an expert in primary education. I mean, I know there's wild variation between what countries get for what they spend, and we should find out, where's doing the best for what we can afford, and what can we learn from it. It's a generic strategy, but I wouldn't want to stick my neck out more than that. Also, the elephant in the room is we haven't been discussing the need for an armed wing. I just wanted to
Which one? Which one is one holding?
You have to hold both of them.
I hereby announce my candidacy as Premier of Gauteng for, won't say which political party. One practical thing we can do, Barry, and obviously I'm biased here, just given my own educational experience, is debating societies in schools.
Even before that, just reading to kids. I mean, if everybody in this room had to go to a school, and they'll have you do it, and say, because everyone has maybe half an hour in a week somewhere they could find, and just go and read to them. Just start it somewhere, then they can get to debating after reading. But my God, illiteracy is the first obstacle.
As I was saying before, Cliff interrupted me. I agree with you about reading, Gareth, but here's the thing, which I said in my column that I was furiously typing out half an hour ago on my Note 3. About you, actually. I referenced you in half of the column tomorrow in the Star. Is that critical thinking you can teach directly, though. Here's the problem with your reading example, just to make it a nuanced interaction. Part of the problem with school and universities, even as lecturers, is that we assume that children have the ability, and students, to read with comprehension and to read analytically. We hope that the ability to think critically is an inherent byproduct of reading. And it's not actually true. And you might listen, as someone very generously said to me over lunch, that they admired my abilities to speak without notes in a structured manner. But the truth is, if you turned me around like a product that looks well put together, you will find underneath what it is made of. And you can reverse engineer the final product. It's made of 10 years of deliberate, direct teaching, first in high school and then at university, of debating as an actual technical exercise and skill set, and actually to grain back in some of our self-deprecation about our subject, in philosophy, teaching directly argumentation as a discipline. And I think we need to teach that directly in schools, and it can be done. I do it throughout the Eastern Cape very well. I've done it in England, I've done it in the Middle East. So there is an actual science to reasoning well. You can come up with fun exercises for kids. I've got the DVDs. But at the moment in South Africa, where everything is in disparities in terms of resources, it is the private schools and the top former Model C schools where I do that kind of work. Those are the schools most interested. You can't, deprive those kids of teachers and headmasters who are ahead of the game and go the extra mile. But one thing I would do differently if I was the Minister of Education is not see an activity like debate coaching as a luxury.
Anybody else want to add to that particular point? Want to throw it out to the audience?
You can contact me. I only have a few left, but I'm happy for you to make copies of them. It goes through debate exercises. And here's the thing, just to, debating, any argument has a structure to it. And what we go through in the exercises is to say, okay, when that guy makes a convincing speech about affirmative action, stop admiring him. Actually, here is the theory behind it. It's really, really boring, but if you stick with me for 5 hours and we do these exercises, it's going to start becoming habit. And then we've got ways of making it fun for kids and that kind of thing, and become second nature. And we've been so nerdish about it. One of my friends who were with me at Oxford did his PhD that showed what is intuitively true in schools from the south side of Chicago, which is that there's an obvious correlation between the kids in those schools who have gone through these debate programs and the one who excel. I mean, you'd probably expect that to be the case anyway, but we now even have the empirical proof of how kids are ahead of the game who go through our debate programs.
I think it was Professor Jonathan Jansen, I think, in his last column this week, which addressed that. It says how South Africans outside of South Africa tend to do a lot better than, I think that was his argument, than staying here. It's the environment that we have created, which doesn't encourage that type of thinking to address those problems. I don't know if you read that this week and you want to comment on that. Yeah.
Just briefly, so as I was suggesting, I think it was 94 or 95 that I first started teaching first-year university students at UCT, and over those 20 years, or now 19 years, the decline has been remarkable in their ability to write an argumentative essay or to express a coherent opinion. And I don't know, David, if your experience maps onto that over that sort of time period. And I would agree that debating should be a way to practice and exercise and play with those skills. But I would want to see, and I've got a disciplinary bias, but I'd want to see philosophy classes in primary school, or as you say, embedding those sorts of principles in science and maths and whatever. It's a complete myth that our system of learning has transitioned. I mean, OBE was implemented in a rush and not coherently thought through, and the curricula was, put together at last minute, and as you know, has since been overturned, and now we've got a new education system. So there hasn't been a stable education system since we had a really bad one, sure, or at least very bad in terms of inequalities. But we haven't had a stable education since democracy. It's been changing too rapidly to have any sort of way of tracking the long-term effects of anything. But it was called outcomes-based education, but it certainly didn't seem to, at least from the position of somebody teaching the products of it, it didn't seem to correlate at all with an ability to focus on the process rather than on the outcomes, the facts. I need to know certain nuggets of information. Don't ask me how I deduce them, as long as I can spit out the right answers. That's what outcomes-based did, as from my position as a teacher of first years.
Yeah, I hear the reading and learning to learn. Yes, it's very cool. And obviously we came from that environment. This is why we studied, well, some of us, I don't know if all of you guys came from an environment where your parents supported you, but if your parents aren't there, on your mom and dad are working all the time, then maybe the real problem is a legacy of our country's history. So if you want to influence education, going to read in class really just, with respect, makes your liberal, I want to feel like I'm contributing self feel okay, and does jack all to change the system. As well as blaming the Minister of Education for everything, also denies a huge amount of history and makes you pretty much just a DA sort of acolyte, I don't know what the word is, yeah, bitch. So, because that's pretty much, you can't compare education in the Western Cape and the Eastern Cape and pretend like they don't have any homelands in the Western Cape. And if you don't add that into your conversation, you're being a doers and you're also denying the history of our country. And so the idea of learning to learn, if you want to change education, vote for a gang and go support Mampela Rampela. There's someone who, because she's shouting, get her into that kind of thing. Not that I'm saying I'm going to do that, because that's a controversial thing Chester Missing supports. But let's not liberalize our discussion on how we can all learn to learn with respect. The problems are very real. And it's not just tenderpreneurs, it's complicated environments, I'm sure.
Conrad, you and I, to use the South African share similar politics, as South Africans say. But I think in this audience, maybe you're making assumptions whereby making that particular comment might be useful for this audience. But I also think you shouldn't overstate that point, though. Jonathan is, and I share the same publisher, Jonathan Jansen. He's coming out with an interesting book early next year. And the premise of his book is to ask the question, how do schools who are incredibly badly under-resourced succeed, the ones who are the exception? Because we can approach this question in at least two ways and say, why is the system so broken? There's still mud schools and there are still teachers who are not on time. And isn't it horrible? And of course, there are interesting historical reasons and there are reasons who have nothing to do with history. Vervoort is not responsible for why a teacher doesn't spend 7 hours at school, but 4 hours. But the other way to approach the question, which is more solution-oriented, is to say, why do schools that should fail, why don't they fail? And the point is that some of them don't fail because actually, despite the fact that Eusebius's mum dropped out in Standard 3, which is a fact, and his dad dropped out in Standard 6, he actually read a shitload. How did that come about? The accuracy of your point about this sort of liberal stuff that you're saying, Gareth is saying, is that it obscures you from asking the question, why did Eusebius read, even though his parents didn't read?
As I hoped to have given to them in terms of the publicity that I seek to give them, and at the same time the help that I'm offering them in a very practical sense from here on in. We have to make these connections somehow. And if it means that occasionally you get out it, I have never, and Conrad, this is something I don't think you and I will ever see eye to eye on. I don't apologize for my privilege. I'm very happy to come from where I come from. I'm very pleased with the advantages I have. I feel guilty about them sometimes, but not often. And I think that it is even more incumbent on me in that respect to get out there and occasionally get my hands dirty and engage myself in discussions which will bring real change to people who haven't had it as easy as I have. But I don't consider it some kind of feel-good, pat myself on the back nonsense that will go away after 15 minutes.
That's a cheeky, Gareth. Yeah, no, I agree with you. There's no point feeling guilty because you ended up in a Mercedes. You got the Mercedes. I don't feel, I'm not going to say I'm sorry for this. That's the way things are. The problem is there is sometimes, in some parts of our community, a tendency to make it about, I was chatting to Sarah Britton there about CSI programs. It's sort of the opiate of the masses. Instead of the argue, because I meet sort of comrades, and they're going, yeah, but don't ask Tiger Brands about how much they gave some love to a school. Ask them about how they benefited from the system and at least put that into the conversation is more what I'm trying to say. Obviously, you must go read at schools, but there must be more than reading at schools.
Can I pull this in back into... Getting a little bit lost there. I was actually hoping Sarah was still going to be here, and I put this to Cecilia. And I suppose it's looking at debates, philosophical debates about is there a God, where do we come from? You started off with these questions that you posed. And I think it's the science that the SKA hopes to, or the answers the SKA hopes to answer, but also what the Large Hadron Collider is also doing in Europe. Sarah was speaking about the type of journalism that she does and trying to bring these facts, this type of information through to a general public. And I was trying to, perhaps you could answer that question, how accessible is that kind of heavy science available to your average person to be able to make informed decisions about these, where did we come from? And is perhaps the SKA project looking at disseminating this kind of information to the general public, and how can we access it?
It's interesting you asked that question. When I joined the SKA about 4.5 years ago, they didn't have a Twitter account. And I said to them, look, this is a way of reaching out to the public. This is the easiest way where you can spread your message. And, we're funded by the taxpayer. So we actually owe it to the public to tell them what we are doing. So at that time, I was told, yeah, whatever, Twitter is rubbish, Facebook, forget it. And only now, today, 4.5 years later, do we actually have a Facebook page, a Twitter page, that is actually, it used to be ad hoc managed by me. I mean, what the hell do I know about science communication? But so finally, I handed over the reins to actually a proper science communicator, And now I think some of you might actually have received the little bookmark that I put out on the tables there. We actually have a Twitter account. We have a Facebook page. At least once a week, there will be a photograph uploaded on the Facebook page of construction happening in the Karoo. And sometimes it's up on Twitter. So our communicator, she doesn't quite feel comfortable yet with Twitter, but she's very comfortable with Facebook. And so at the moment, that's the one way that we're actually trying to get information out there. What is actually happening? I know there are some people who, oh yeah, I'm not on Facebook and Facebook is a lot of rubbish. That's unfortunate because at the moment, that's the one platform that we actually use a lot. But then, of course, there's our website. Our website isn't updated that frequently, but every now and then there will be a press release of something that is happening and that is newsworthy. Will go up there. The same with photographs. We have now employed a professional photographer. So actually the last slide that I had, that was actually one of the photographs taken by a professional photographer, which is up there for you to download. So I mean, if you want to have a cool wallpaper of our SKA dishes, then go ahead, download it. So that's the one way. It's not our office directly releasing easily digestible information to the public, but it will be through having these press events where journalists like Sarah, like Elsbie Brits from Die Burger, they are capable of interpreting that jargon and making it understandable to the layman. I mean, half of the jargon I don't understand either. I understand the engineering jargon, but the cosmology jargon just goes over my head. And then I even look to them to interpret that jargon for me and to make it so that I can understand what they're actually talking about. So we still definitely have a long way to go. We don't currently have someone full-time employed in the office to do it. But I think we're getting there. And I think the international SKA office have actually employed a full-time communicator. And I think from the international office, you will start seeing press releases and maybe blog posts that are more easily understandable to the general public. Yes, actually we do. I know there was a snide remark about CSI projects. Well, obviously we do a lot of CSI projects in the Carnarvon area. And we take the school kids from the local area, we take them to a site. I mean, this site is really in the middle of nowhere. I saw there was a tweet saying, you've got 5 kilometers of copper cable and you think it will be safe. Trust me, it is safe. It's really very far and really in the middle of nowhere. But we take kids there, and when the kids suddenly see these dishes, you can just see their eyes light up. It's like, oh, wow, this is what you look at the stars, They understand that. And that somewhere, hopefully, that plants a little seed on that curiosity, that quest for knowledge, that hunger to want to know, how does this thing actually look at the stars? And how do you know that the stars are made of the same stuff that I'm made of? So we do that. I don't think we do it enough. But we're trying through our bursary projects, our science awards that we give to science projects, to kids who do well at science expos. We're trying through that to cultivate that knowledge and that thirst. Sorry, what was your second question again? Oh, the visitor centre. Not yet. The Carnarvon municipality have actually earmarked land for us, so they have said here is land available where we can develop a visitor centre, but that's about as far as it's gotten at this stage. As with all these things, it's funding that's an issue, and so we first have to go and look for money to actually build it.
Gareth, don't you think we should be mindful of who or when we should be saying or doing things which could potentially offend people? And I raise a practical example, and we look at the recent controversy with Zapiro and his Lord Ganesha cartoon, where I think many people would have probably agreed with his critique of Cricket South Africa. However, he, perhaps through his ill-thought use of this god, may have alienated people. And I think, Jacques, where you could speak to that is this issue of how you approach things. And you might want to encourage the debate, but your approach to it would frighten people away.
Causing offence needs to be a tactic. It needs to be part of your set of resources. I mean, sometimes it's necessary, sometimes it's essential. If you get the sense that there's some sacred cow out there that needs to be put on the barbecue, then you need to deploy that tactic. But I think if it's a stock kind of response, if it's the way we habitually respond to situations, then you're not doing it for a purpose. You're gratuitously harming people without any payback. So if it's your default mode of conversation, then that's a problem. But I think that it shouldn't be disallowed. And I would also urge us to focus on the other end of the debate, which is persuading people that they should not find the things that they find offensive as they do. So yes, that person is offensive, and yes, that's a failure of decorum. That person is rude, but A, that doesn't make them wrong, and B, that doesn't make you right, which are separate things, which we often forget.
I think that's exactly right. First of all, I'm amused by your use of sacred cow, particularly with regard to Ganesh and Hinduism. And of course, we all know that the only reason that cows are sacred is because the Indian government realized very early on in the establishment of the country that it was a good idea to make this customary practice, which was followed by some and not by others, law, so that they would have some means of disposable income, no matter what happened in terms of currency. They'd have cows that they could sell or buy or use and trade, and that this was an important thing to help the poorest of the poor to just have something. So they made it religious law. An example, a rare, shining example of where religious dogma can be turned into something positive. In terms of offending people, I think that we must be careful also not to patronize a whole lot of Indians with a good sense of humor who happen to be Hindus who must have laughed at that cartoon too, just like everyone else. And they, just because they don't scream from parapets and fire off guns into the sky and say how rude and nasty and deplorable we are and how we should be burnt at the stake, does not mean that they are not the majority. And I also think that a cartoon is a fucking cartoon. When will we get to the stage where someone's drawings can't be taken so seriously that you're willing to cause harm because you've seen a cartoon? What are we dealing with here? Children come back from school at 6 years old having drawn big penises and vaginas all over everything, and we deal with it. Surely we can find the resources to deal with adult drawings.
And I think that's it. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending this conference today. Oh, one more. As long as it's not an attack this side of the stage.
I love Gareth. We're allowed to disagree with each other here. Why are we here if we can't? I actually Chester wrote the tagline at the back of Zapiro's book, and I was at the launch the day after this happened, which happened to be a Gupta-themed wedding. So he had all this Gupta stuff, and he was in cuck because of Hinduism all at the same time. So it looked like he really hated Indian stuff at that one exact point. The problem with the debate is simple. From a satirist, because I get closer to being rude to the ANC than any other comedian. Because I'm right I go to their offices. The problem is that we have this narrative going that cartoonists should just be freedom of speech is just right, and that his target matter must just be accepted, and that's in the media, in this room. Of course, it makes complete sense. I understand. I'm rude to politicians all the time, but that we don't question to some degree a guy from a certain background using an Eastern symbol. There's Edward Said, there's loads of academic writing on why it's a problem to do that, and that isn't part of our conversation. I mean, it's right. Those are a bunch of ANC goons who did what, you got to use the G on goons or you sound like you're being racist. They're a bunch of ANC dudes who got upset. We have to be aware of it, but at the same time, we must include the whole conversation.
All right, I think that's it. Thank you, everyone, for coming through for this 2013 FSI conference. Jacques, thank you to all the panelists and the guests. Good evening.